today for the release of Citizens for Juvenile Justice latest report, E-carceration, the impact of GPS monitoring in Massachusetts criminal and juvenile systems. This report takes a deep look into the use of court and justice system ordered GPS monitoring in the Commonwealth's justice systems, and it looks beyond the data points to explore the varying layers of impact of wearing that monitor, sometimes for an incredibly lengthy period of time. How does wearing a monitor impact someone's social and emotional and mental health? Does it promote or inhibit someone's academic and work needs? And does the use or overuse of GPS technology truly promote rehabilitation and better outcomes? We embarked upon this study because, despite it being touched on in other reports, we still found that the imposition and utilization of GPS is understudied. And from our experience working in the system and hearing from those who've been placed on this level of monitoring, we had concerns that it was arguably being overused. We also believe that this is an incredibly nuanced issue, deserving of a closer and more in-depth study. GPS monitoring may have less significant negative impacts on a person than being incarcerated, but as you'll hear today, it is not in and of itself a silver bullet. We will explore the need for adequate guardrails to ensure that this tool is being used appropriately and for appropriate lengths of time. I'd like to remind you that the report is now live on CfJJ's website. If you'd like to take a look, we encourage you to download, and you can reach it on our website via the Publications tab. Additionally, please follow us on social media at CfJJMA on Instagram and Threads, Citizens for Juvenile Justice on LinkedIn and Facebook to continue to learn about this report and all of our work at CfJJ. Lastly, a quick housekeeping matter. We will have a Q&A segment later on in today's program, so feel free to drop questions in the chat during the presentation or use the reactions button to raise your hands during the Q&A portion of today's event. And with that, I hand things over to Joshua Dankoff, the author of the report, to begin today's program. Josh, over to you.
Thanks so much, Leon. I'm going to just put the slideshow on. Thanks so much, Leon. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Nice to see some familiar faces and look forward to engaging with everyone who's here. As Leon mentioned, we are launching today this report, E-carceration, the impact of the GPS monitoring on the Massachusetts criminal and juvenile legal systems. Very briefly, if you're not familiar with CfJJ, we are now a 31-year-old organization, the only independent nonprofit statewide organization working to improve juvenile justice system in Massachusetts, also thinking a lot about feeder systems with a focus on birth to 25 as our target population. We look at the whole system as well through advocacy, including legislative advocacy, which you'll hear a little bit about today, research, which you'll hear a lot about today, public education, you're here today, and community engagement and coalition building. Briefly, the agenda, I'm going to go through the findings of the report as well as some recommendations. And then we're going to hear from Representative Marjorie Decker, who is a sponsor of a bill related to GPS here that's currently in Massachusetts State House, as well as Nuruddin Alabi, who had experience as someone who with a GPS monitor here in Massachusetts as a young person. As Leon mentioned, there is time for Q&A, so we look forward to engaging questions afterwards. Really quickly to set the stage, as Leon said before, why are we doing this? We're doing this because there's a gap in knowledge. This really came from a question that we were hearing that there was, especially early in COVID, perhaps an increase in the number of children and adults who are being ordered onto GPS monitors. But we didn't actually know if that was true. And so all of this was trying to answer the question of just how many people are on GPS monitors, where, why, what are their, what are their demographics, how long are they on, which seemed to us to be pretty simple questions. It turned out to be a lot harder to answer those questions than we wanted. This report is where we are now. It presents both the data that's available, and I will be very clear when data is unavailable. We thought it very important not to just look at data, but also really talk to people who have been directly impacted. And I'll try to bring in a few of the case studies and stories from interviews with directly impacted folks. But we relied on public records requests and research requests to Massachusetts Probation Service, as well as interviews with stakeholders, mostly focusing on young people and adults who had or were currently wearing GPS monitors at the time. So the first part of this report is a little data heavy, so bear with me, but I just want to try to provide an overview of what we've learned about what does it look like, the system for GPS monitoring in Massachusetts. And I'm following along in the structure of the report. So when you see A, B, C, D for these headings, that's going along with what's happening. So first, at multiple stages in the legal process, a judge or other decision makers can order a person to wear a GPS monitor. And this figure on the right really shows that this can happen at a pretrial phase, where either juvenile or adults can be ordered pretrial to wear their ankle bracelets, ankle monitors that have GPS tracking on them. Or it can happen post-adjudication after someone in the adult context has been found guilty and ordered onto probation. And one of the conditions of being released to probation is, again, a GPS monitor. And it can also happen post-incarceration. In the adult side, that can mean for people who are on their way ending their time in prison at DOC or in the houses of correction. This is just as Middlesex, but it is also now other houses of correction. Or a large number of people who are on parole. On the juvenile side, there's a small GPS program monitored, run by Department of Youth Services. So just to say, when does GPS happen? It can and does happen throughout the system. And this the other image here you have shows who is imposing conditions and then who administers those conditions. Sometimes you'll note, for example, that the parole board is imposing the conditions, but then the administration is through professional staff. And MPS, you'll see through this, is referring to Massachusetts Probation Service. It's important to note also that the statute, there are statutes, and also the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court and U.S. Supreme Court have placed really only moderate limitations on using GPS monitors. So I've summarized this. This is an active area, and the SJC here in Massachusetts has had a number of cases, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here today, but just know that this is an active area of law. And I've tried to just summarize some of the key points. So first, that affixing a GPS monitor is considered a search under the Fourth Amendment and also under the Article 14 in the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, but that the search need to be found reasonable and determined on an individualized basis. And both the SJC and the Supreme Court use a balancing test to figure out what does reasonableness mean, to figure out whether an order of being put on GPS is constitutional. Now, it's important, and anyone who has the lived experience of being on a monitor knows this, but people awaiting trial, anyone on a GPS has a diminished expectation of privacy, and this is the constitutional consideration of privacy relative to ordinary citizens. I'm putting that in quotes, but relative to people who are not on GPS. But people pre-trial have a higher level of privacy expectations than those are in probation. Really importantly, when someone has a GPS monitor on, their expectation of privacy regarding their location data really is diminished. And we see that that is the case certainly through how police or law enforcement can use the knowledge of someone being on GPS in ongoing investigations. So if there's an incident that takes place in an area, one of the things that the police can do and do is they will ask probation, who monitors the GPS the system for the large majority of people in Massachusetts. They will ask, who was wearing a bracelet that was sort of in this general area at this time. And they will then go and follow up with those people. So again, that's not something that they're not able. Police aren't able to figure out who is there just for anyone. The people not on GPS, they can't do that just based on cell phone pings, but they can do that on GPS, and the SJC has determined that that is constitutional. And just one note, I'll try that this report does touch on both juvenile and adult system, but for young people, for children in the system, both the rehabilitation and stigmatization consequences have been considered a legitimate interest alongside the expectation of privacy. And that's just important to note as we go. I need to fix what I'm looking at in the screen, so just bear with me with 1 second so I can see at least someone's face here. All right, I'm going to share screen again. Thank you for your patience. Oh, it is still sharing. Okay. The population of people on GPS monitoring in Massachusetts reached a high point above 4,000, kind of between 2019 and 2021, and is now reduced to about 3,800. I just want to say that I'm only talking about people on GPS in the sort of ordered through Massachusetts state systems. I'm not referring to people on in immigration proceedings who are ordered into GPS through the federal immigration system. That's outside the scope of this report. I will drop into the chat afterwards an important article that this is something that is increasing quite dramatically this year and is important. It's just not the scope of this report. And just to note that the numbers you see in the left side are from the contracting process that probation has. So probation in their contract in 2016 said, they expected about 3,500 people with sort of a minimum and maximum that they required their vendor to use to have available, and that they upped that number to 6,000, and those numbers have remained about the same since then. All right, this slide took a lot of time to put together. And this is a summary of all of the agencies in Massachusetts and the number of people who are wearing bracelets. Most of this data is from June 2024, with the exception of the sheriff's data, which is about a year more current, July 2025. And just to note that the large majority of people on bracelets are on probation, pretrial probation, and then second most risk need probation, which is the adjudicated, either adjudicated delinquent or found guilty and being ordered on probation monitoring. So that is the large majority of people here in Massachusetts. So the smaller box here means a smaller number. And then after that is parole. And then in green are all of the sheriffs, and then really tiny programs from the Department of Correction and Department of Youth Services. And this is, imagine this sort of as a flash in time, not over the course of the year, but in one day, roughly in June 2024, how many people were wearing bracelets. And it's important to note that people are often forced to wear GPS monitors for months or years, both pretrial and on parole. This data here is from parole. And you'll see the majority of people are only wearing a GPS monitor for less than 4 months, 16 weeks or fewer, but that there's a full 6% of people who end up wearing a bracelet for longer than 2 years, and that's a really long time. I'll note over here on the left side, I would love to have a similar graph to show you of probation data, but it is just simply not available to show what's happening on the probation side. So even though probation has the large majority of people on GPS monitors, and even though I've spent more than 2 years trying to figure this out, that data is simply unavailable. And that's unfortunate, and you can wait till the recommendations to to know that I recommend improved data collection systems from the probation side. It is also pretrial though, and we know that from talking to people, and there'll be at least one case study later here to hear about the length of time some people spend free trial. Two quick things, the GPS monitoring in Massachusetts is administered through a contract with private vendors. The report goes through and lists those vendors. Important to note that a lot of the information from the report was put together. Well, important to note that probation recently changed vendors in the early part of 2025, and that a lot of the information and stories from this report were from before that time. So probation has argued, and at least said in some of their public-facing statements, that the new vendor has improved technology, and I hope that is true. But for the DYS has separate contracts. Parole operates its GPS work under the probation contract, and the sheriffs have individual contracts as well. And it's important to state again that the data on GPS monitoring is largely out of public view, and especially from probation, which is responsible for the majority. So the next few slides you're going to hear from me are going to be in some detail from the sort of little pieces of data, kind of like bubbles of data that are available. But just know that these are small portions of the large piece. And the majority of this, if I was going to paint a picture of the data availability, the majority would be a blank screen because of what is happening from probation. So I do want to, after more than a year of discussion, I did receive some data from probation just about juveniles, children who are on GPS monitors in Massachusetts. So this is like a flash in time from October of a population of 217 young people who are on pretrial monitoring, or actually the 217 juveniles on wearing a bracelet at that time. And one thing you'll see is, again, the large majority, more than 80%, are on pretrial, and then a smaller percentage on risk need, and only 2% on administrative probation, which is a term that probation uses for those on relatively small amount of oversight. We were able, at least from this 217, not the overall, know the racial and ethnic makeup, and it's important to see that 74% of the young people wearing a monitor are either Black or Latino, and only 16% white. And we have again a snapshot of the sort of unevenness around the state, again just within juvenile context, of where which counties have our young people wearing monitors. And so we see Suffolk County and Middlesex are the top two, and then Essex and Plymouth and Bristol and all the way down. So it is uneven. And again, I don't have this information for the adult side, with the exception of parole, which is where we're going now. I will say, one important piece that is not in this data is, I was going to sort of summarize the use of juvenile court pretrial GPS monitoring. I would say that the juvenile court judges are using GPS primarily during pretrial to keep youth, including some youth accused of relatively serious offenses, in the community. And the majority of those youth are also under home confinement. 80% of the total of this 217 were on home confinement. So not only are they wearing a GPS monitor, but they're ordered to be in their homes. As a case study, I did get better data from parole, and so the report reflects that. We have a sort of year over year, the number of new people who are put on GPS monitors from parole. So that's hovered around 1,300. And that as a sort of any one day, the number of people on parole wearing a GPS monitor, again, it sort of from 2020 went up from about 550 to over 700, and then more recently has been back closer to 550. All right. The next two sections talk about sort of concerns that we have specific to GPS monitoring as administered here in Massachusetts, and then next as monitored, sort of concerns we have about the technology that's intrinsic to the technology. So first, in Massachusetts, we see that GPS monitoring is often imposed too broadly and also for too long. For the too long part, I'll mention here once that one young person said, "My ankle was turning black," and that was sort of in reference to the monitor against her skin. She said that she was confined at home after 6 p.m. every day from age 16 until 19 for 3 years, and that confinement was enforced by a GPS monitor. We see that GPS monitors are often imposed as an agency or courtroom norm for some people, pretrial and also in parole, and that the monitoring can sometimes remain in place despite overall compliance with the terms of release, including the compliance with the GPS monitor, and that there aren't really system incentives in place to revisit whether the monitoring is still necessary. Now, it's important for me to say, a lot of people in the system that we spoke to will say, look, even for public defenders, they'll say, I'd prefer to have my client in the community on GPS than locked up pretrial. And I totally understand that. And I want to be very clear that nothing in this report is trying to suggest that if the decision is between locking a person up or having them be at home pretrial, in any circumstance in the community with a GPS monitor, I'll probably choose, and I understand why system actors choose and for their clients to have someone in the community. But I think it's also important to know that that's not really the only comparison we should look at. There is also a question of, does the person need to be on the GPS monitor at all or not? And in that case, it is in that context that I'm saying that GPS monitoring is often imposed too broadly and for too long. Not only is this sort of a norm that everyone coming out of, my understanding is everyone or almost everyone coming out of parole is put on a GPS monitor, whether that's appropriate or not. But also the opportunities to, if someone's on a monitor, to go back to the decision maker and say, actually, I don't need this, and this isn't actually helping me, and it's not keeping the community safer than they would be otherwise. Those opportunities are not there. We also see frequent technical violations that result from malfunctioning devices and excessively stringent monitoring requirements. And I've listed here the monitoring requirements, the sort of GPS rules and procedures for probation. And this is for everybody who's put on a monitor. And this includes keeping the GPS device charged at all times. That often took, at least in the previous contract, took 2 hours of uninterrupted charge every single day. My understanding is the new contract, it's longer battery life. And that to stay out of exclusion zones and be in by a curfew. So GPS monitors are designed to let the surveillance system know where someone is, and to alert them if they go into a place where they're not to be, or in a time when they are not supposed to be there. And we know that at least a portion of people, at least from the juveniles, from the young people, are placed on GPS monitors without any exclusion zone or curfews. So while I said 80% were on home confinement, at least some people, they're put on a bracelet, but there's not sort of a geographic or time reason for them to be wearing a bracelet. I want to just mention there are a couple. I'm going to read a couple case studies here because this is where really speaking to people who had this experience is better than just hearing from me. So one parent who was a parent of a child who was wearing a GPS monitor said, quote, "Throughout the entire time my children were on the bracelet, every other minute it would go off. It was malfunctioning. Probation would call my phone after 2 minutes and say they'd gotten a beep saying there was something wrong. And I'd tell them that he was in bed, that my child was home in bed. There were times that we had to drive all the way to Quincy. That's the place nearest to Boston. There they could monitor or deal with these monitors to get it serviced, even in the middle of night at all hours. I don't drive. I'm a single mom. It didn't make any sense. He'd be in class and he'd have to leave class to go get it serviced, get the GPS device serviced, just so he didn't get locked up. There's no compensation for me either. If I had to get out of there, I had to get out of there. I was pulling so many resources. It was a nightmare. One other person said, this was also a 17-year-old, said that described that the zone, the sort of exclusion zone of where Tony could be, was drawn incorrectly on the map, so that only part of his house was included, but it excluded the shower. So that meant that every time he went to take a shower, his monitor treated him as out of the zone, and after 5 minutes, an alert would force him to get out of the shower and go into another room. One time he realized that he was in the shower and he realized that he hadn't received an alert he was accustomed to, and he realized that the charger had caused his device to run out of battery. And then he sort of plugged in his monitor and took a nap, but was awoken by police who said that they were forced to arrest him because his monitor was out of battery. And he spent 2 nights in jail, even though he was at home napping because of before getting released, all because of a charging problem. So again, these are what I just talked about were challenges to sort of the technology as administered here. And I'm going to talk quickly about some of the negative impacts intrinsic to GPS technology, as well as talk about some recommendations, and then you won't hear from me anymore. First, I just want to put out there that GPS monitoring imposes a physical confinement, especially for the 80% of young people on GPS monitors who are on home confinement, that is in some ways akin to incarceration. And that's why we entitled the report E-carceration. It's not a term that we developed, but it's one that I think is here. And here, this case study, this example from this young person that I mentioned before, who said she was on the bracelet from 15, 16 until 19. And she was at home all those years I was on the bracelet. My mom was never home. My stepdad was never home. I'd just be alone. There'd be days when I went the whole day without talking to anybody. I'd wake up, go to school. So she was allowed to go to school. I'd get home, go to my room because I didn't have any time after school that I could be out of the house. And that during that time I became antisocial. It was depressing. It felt like I had something like an anchor keeping me right here. I'll just say it gave me a kind of PTSD. And that she said, before I was more outgoing, more girly. I don't like the way I am now. One other case study was this person said right when he was about to get his GPS monitor off. One of the issue here is that wearing a GPS monitor subjects you to increased surveillance, right? I already mentioned that one issue where police can use the fact that someone's on surveillance as an investigatory tool. But here he's about to get the GPS monitor off. He felt like the police knew. He said, a police officer banged on our door at 9 p.m. He seemed like he was fishing for evidence. They said the GPS wasn't charged, but it was fully charged. Oh, this was a mother talking about her son. My son volunteered to get the charger and show it was charged, and the officer tried to follow him in the house. He would have searched more if I'd let him in the house. My son showed the officer that the bracelet was charged. The officer said nothing and walked out the door. I've been going too slow, so one of the most important things to consider is that we heard over and over issues of being on a monitor for young people stalling their academic, social, and emotional progress. And the way the GPS monitor significantly restricts and intrudes daily life, that it makes it hard for people and as what people monitored, but also their families to even go through life in a normal way. We know that this is especially pronounced for young people, and that at school, GPS monitors interrupt the school day, and a person with a GPS monitor may not be able to access extracurricular activities or supports that haven't been approved in advance. There's also certainly stigma associated with having the monitor and having it be visible outside the pants or even a bulge there that several young people spoke about. I will note the Office of the Child Advocate put out a report on pre-trial conditions for young people and made a specific recommendation that GPS be used sparingly. And I think it's just important for us to keep that in mind. One other example here is that wearing a GPS monitor can interfere with young people's ability to get care, health care. For those on home confinement, the administrative requirements for a person to get an appointment with a doctor or social worker are often tedious and practicable. There's one case study that was pretty galling. This young person, was wearing a GPS monitor, and he needed to get surgery to remove a bullet fragment, but he needed court approval before he could get the necessary medical care, and including they needed to take the monitor off before the surgery. But the court scheduling issues, and because of the GPS, it prolonged a waiting period, and he wasn't able to get the surgery in the time that he wanted to. It was prolonged for a month. We also heard a story of one person who said that they were having a medical emergency and they called their probation officer before they called 911 because they were scared if they called 911 and they were taken to the ER that they would get violated for not being where they were supposed to be because of the monitor. I'm running short on time, but just to say the research is limited as to the effectiveness of GPS monitoring, especially for young people. The Office of the Child Advocate report went into more detail about that. I'm going to move on to recommendations in the interest of time to try to keep this whole presentation under an hour. So first, for legislators, judges, attorneys, and administrators, everyone should really think about GPS monitoring as a type of incarceration. And this is like a mindset shift that reframing GPS as incarceration would really allow the enactment of legislation to limit conditions and the duration of electronic monitoring. And the legislature should, recognize the significant liberty deprivation imposed by GPS monitoring. And one thing to say is there's a specific act, and I'm glad Rep. Decker is here to speak in a couple minutes. CfJJ supports a bill, an act to enhance fairness and increase positive outcomes for children that is a start to this. I don't think it addresses all of the concerns, but is certainly a start. Secondly, I think it's important for decision makers at state, county, and court levels to try to target a lasting reduction in the frequency and length of GPS monitors. But that should again, this needs to be in tandem with ongoing reductions in incarceration. Let's not have this be whack-a-mole where we sort of purposely and intentionally try to reduce GPS that then results in an increase in people locked up both pretrial and post-adjudication. That is not what I'm advocating for. But just to think that GPS monitoring and other community supervision should be prioritized over incarceration, but it should also be minimized in favor of release to the community on personal recognizance when appropriate. And one thing I noted here is not just the frequency, but the length of time that people are on GPS monitors. So it's important to have more meaningful review periods, and that's something that the bill that I mentioned does. Yeah. Just a couple more slides. All of the system actors should focus, who actually administer these monitors, should try to make the lived experience of GPS monitoring less disruptive. That can be through improved technology, but also importantly through the use of fewer conditions, and to make sure to clarify and streamline rules and not punish people for technical issues and violations. I do want to note that it's important for the data for these agencies who have the data about people on GPS, especially pretrial, that data should be automatically purged from agency databases at the point of disposition, whether or not the case, whether it leads to someone being on a monitor later or not. The data piece is important and not one that I've seen addressed elsewhere. because we don't know how that data can be used, whether someone could go back later and say, well, this person was on a monitor years ago, and there's a question there, a question about that person. Second to last, it's important to develop juvenile and young adult specific GPS policies that are both legally and developmentally appropriate, that always allow for attending school and have age-sensitive protocols, and to engage young youth advocates on this question. And last, as I mentioned before, the data is still really bad here in Massachusetts, and I'm gonna look at probation here. I know that they can do better. They've been talking for 10 years now about having a case management system in place that will allow, among other things, improved data here. But it shouldn't be that even after a couple of years of trying to pull together the data, that I still can't answer some of the fundamental questions that I asked at the beginning of where are people on monitors across the state? How long have they been there? What's their racial makeup? And it's not just that outsiders should have, advocates should have this. These are important questions that the agencies themselves, that probation can't answer themselves, and that this is something that's impacting almost 4,000 people in the Commonwealth. And we want to make sure that the data is there to be able to do continual quality improvement. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you for your patience. And is Rep. Decker in the room?
Yes, she is, and I can take it from here, Josh. Thank you so much for going through in detail all the information about the report. But now I have the pleasure of introducing someone who has been a true ally and champion for our young people, both in her district and across the Commonwealth, on a wide range of issues: education, mental health, juvenile and criminal justice. It's always an honor to work with her, and especially to have her here today to talk about the legislation that Josh mentioned. So I will now hand the microphone over to Representative Marjorie Decker. Welcome.
Thank you, Leon. I want to thank you and Josh and everyone on this call for all the work you're doing every day, both on the ground, supporting families and young people in Massachusetts, and also making sure that we in the legislature are the best partners we can possibly be to those families. I just want to say that on this specific bill, just so that you know, I have raised this up this week to leadership as a priority bill. It is absolutely, we are really clear that continuing to humiliate young people as an additional burden of punishment is not a part of what we should be doing. Not only do we continue to humiliate them, right? It also makes it harder for them to actually go out and transition and to do the kind of work that we expect them to do when trying to figure out their path to move forward. The data shows that this does not improve outcomes. I'd say the scenarios that we have, in fact, we need more data on showing what I think we all know. Who is this actually impacting? Who are the majority of young people who are actually having to wear these ankles? Who do they reflect? I think we know that they reflect the majority of low-income young people and young people of color. But the data allows us to actually not look away from the truth of what we already know. We don't need the data to do that, but the data makes it impossible to deny the truth of who's being harmed. So this is a bill that I can tell you is a really a priority of mine, one that I am really talking about to leadership, and one that I really think this should be part of the low-hanging fruit. If we need to monitor the whereabouts of young people, there's ways that we can do this. This is not the way. It physically impairs them, and the additional trauma that young people are experiencing. I've had the opportunity to talk to young people who've experienced this. This is not who we are in Massachusetts. We are not Georgia. We are not Texas. And I say that because those are the states that we so sometimes smugly and comfortably think about when they don't actually have a holistic, evidence-based, kind, thoughtful approach to juvenile justice. Does not align with who we think we are as a state. But as long as we continue doing stuff like this, it is who we are. And At the end of the day, our job is to make sure not only are young people who've made mistakes able to move forward, but that we don't add the additional harm and create additional obstacles and actually helping them move there. And there's a lot of young people who make a lot of big mistakes and it doesn't ruin their lives and they are not additionally traumatized. And absolutely issues around race and class and resources and connections and privilege make that possible for young people every day in this country. And as it should, every young person actually deserves the opportunity to be supported, uplifted, to make mistakes, to have to actually face the punishments that are sometimes required for those mistakes, but to be uplifted and supported and moved with all of us actually carrying them and cheering them on. This is the opposite of that.
Well, thank you so much, Rep. Decker, so much just for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today and for your amazing advocacy on this issue and your work championing and really prioritizing this legislation. And as always, just for centering the needs of our young people. Thank you so much.
Listen, thank you. I'm so grateful for the work that you and all of your colleagues and advocates do every day. And our job is to make sure that you can actually do that work in removing as many obstacles for the needs that are already so important and often unmet. So thank you.
Appreciate you. Now I will move on to introduce our next speaker. And I will say that I am personally so incredibly proud of this young man, what he's overcome and accomplished in his life. Nuruddin Alabi represents the potential and resilience of our young people and the power of education to transform lives. He has risen from being directly impacted by the juvenile and criminal justice system to recently graduating with his bachelor's degree in business from Boston College. He personally, in his experiences in the system, experienced GPS monitoring and is here to tell us a personal story because, again, Josh gave you a lot of data, but this issue is bigger than data. Those data points represent real young people and a real impact on our lives. So I'll now turn it over to Nuruddin to give his personal experiences with GPS and his perspective on this issue. Mr. Alabi, floor is yours. Oh, I think you're still muted.
Oh, all right. Hear me? All right. Thank you for allowing me to be here today to share briefly about my story about being a juvenile on the GPS bracelet. I had 2 stints on being on the GPS bracelet as a juvenile in the early 2000s. The first and second time was for possession of marijuana, and this was pre-trial, so they put me on the bracelet until the judge decided what he was going to do with the case. They took me out of school and put me in a program called the JRC program, the Juvenile Resource Center. So it took me out of Boston Public Schools and put me in, like, it was at the Superior Court. So we had to report there at 9 a.m. and my curfew was 3:30, but we left Superior Court at 3, so it only gave me 30 minutes to get home. And that during that time, I had to get home in 30 minutes, which gave me like anxiety to make sure I get home. So if I didn't get home in time, I'll get violated and get put back in DYS. That happened once. When I came home late, they called, they gave me a warning. Then the second time, I got home on time, but I guess the box was malfunctioning and it showed that I came like 5 minutes late. And while I was at home, Boston police came to the house, took me out of my room and brought me to the station. And then the next day, I met my PO. They was gonna put me in DYS, but she gave me a second chance. I spent the night in the police station for something that I was already home for, and brought me to the police station for the night, and then released me the next day. I finished the Juvenile Resource Center for 3 months. I was taken off the bracelet, and then I was from the age of 14, and then I got onto the bracelet again for possession of marijuana again when I was 16, until I turned 17. And I was put on the bracelet at that time. I ended up finding a job And then being that my curfew restricted me from able to continue in that job, I had a job at Shaw's, does bagging groceries, but I couldn't do that job due to my curfew because the hours as a juvenile you can't work a certain time, and being on pretrial probation didn't allow me to work those hours, so I had to leave the job. And during that time, I just felt like the anxiety of me not being able to work, being fearful that I might get violated for small things like how I got violated the first time. I never really left the house. So I had a curfew, but I just never left due to the fact that I might get violated for something minor. To seeing other individuals that were in the same situation as me getting violated, just the fact that I live in a high crime area at the time in Roxbury. So if something happens in my neighborhood, I will get pulled in for that as well. And doesn't have nothing to do with me. So just being due to that fact, I just stayed in the house to make sure that they could see that I'm in the house and won't be violated for something that happens outside of my control. So that anxiety of being inside I think it had a lasting effect on me due to the fact that being on the bracelet is a target. Just the fact that, like when I was walking down the street or things like that, when officers see that ankle monitor, it's like a bullseye on your back to stop you, ask questions. You're the prime suspect due to the fact that they see the ankle monitor on my leg, and this that has an effect, giving me anxiety, not trusting police and things like that, and just being around individuals that are in a similar situation as myself. So I feel like there's other alternatives to GPS ankle monitor bracelet program that they're trying to impose on juveniles and adults as well. I feel like it should be more focused on mental health assistance to caseworkers and things like that, get to the root of the problem of why they been committing a crime or allegedly committing a crime, to just focus on their household, family dynamic, and most importantly, education. Because I feel like education is a key factor of why individuals don't have better understanding, and science has shows that juveniles don't make good decisions at that age. So just being able to have those resources around them instead of just confining them to their home will make a big difference, I think, other than just confining them into their home or having a curfew and things like that. But I just wanted to share my experience as a juvenile being on the GPS bracelet. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Nuruddin, for being here, for being willing to open up and share your story. And just for everyone in attendance, we hope that you would take the research and the data home. But the reason we have someone like Nuruddin here and the reason we have these case studies, we hope you take with you the impact that being left to linger on these bracelets can have on the life of a young people in ways that may not be intended, but still carry, as Nuruddin said, the impact of this is something that young people can continue to carry with them years afterwards. And so with that, we have about 10 minutes left to go. We'll now shift to question and answer. Please feel free to raise your hand using the reactions button on your Zoom, or to drop any questions in the chat. And between myself, Josh, Nuruddin, Rep Decker, we're happy to try to answer them.
While questions are coming in, I just want to restate, Nuruddin, thanks so much for sharing. And the things that you said really are reflected in some of the findings of the report, right?
Mhm.
Fear and anxiety of being violated, right? The mental health impact, that you're choosing to stay in the house because you know the increased surveillance and and as you said, the ankle monitor as a bullseye on your back for police walking around. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really do mean it about open to questions from anyone.
Thank you.
Questions, comments, thoughts. And I'll say this piece, Rep Decker did a wonderful job talking about the legislation. One thing the legislation does is it looks, in looking at GPS, it would build in the ability, once someone has been on GPS, to be able to have a hearing to determine if GPS is still necessary. As someone who was a lawyer who practiced many years in a juvenile court, I would often agitate for for the young people I was working with to get off of GPS. It's like, you put this on, they've proven that they can abide by court rules. Why are we allowing this young person to linger on? But why should that be left up to an individual attorney when it should be something that, as a system, a rehabilitative system, a system that is supposed to be about helping young people get to better outcomes? Why would we not build that in? And I know in Massachusetts, we believe that we're the magical unicorn and we're different. But California is an example of another state which has implemented this type of policy change, and one that we would be, in my opinion, wise to take a look at. So, thoughts, questions? Looks like seeing none. I would just like to again give a big thank you to everyone for coming and spending an hour of your day with us today. I would again, oh, we do have a question. I almost jumped the gun. So Mara in the chat says, do you know what the DOC GPSs might be about? I am trying to imagine what scenarios those might reflect. Josh?
Yeah, so Department of Corrections has a very small program, usually like between about 5 people on GPS at any one time. My understanding is that I'm not sure their exact criteria of why they choose, but it has to do with people who are stepping down and returning to the community, and with the reentry centers. So they're still in GPS custody, legal custody, but they may still be going to the community. So it's towards the end of a time of a GPS sentence, but maybe one that is not ending because of parole, because in that case, parole would be the body that is responsible. And just to mention the House of Correction, there are, it's either 6 or 7. I got to look up the report. It's a good reason to go to the report. Several of the House of Correction also have GPS monitoring programs. Most of them are very small. A couple of them have GPS monitoring programs that they don't, they have a program in place, but they don't actually have anyone on a bracelet. Several of them have, about 5 or 10 people. The one exception to that is Essex County Sheriff's Department that has more than 100 people on a GPS monitor. And my understanding is they basically, for anyone in the sort of stepping down to their community corrections location, they use a monitor for that reason.
Thank you, Josh. Any other questions or thoughts? All right. Thank you all again. Just a few quick notes before we end. The report is live. If you go in the chat, you can see the link, cfjj.org/GPS-monitoring. It is available on our website. Again, please consider following us on social media at CfJJ or Citizens for Juvenile Justice. And again, thank you so much for coming.